Chapter 18. The Coming of the Storphariad. Such were the concerns through which I navigated the intervening years to the present. No definitive condensation of the thing we sought has yet occurred. What did occur was the continued elaboration of the theories both of hypercarbylation and of the nature of time. In late 1975, The Invisible Landscape was published and our ideas made publicly available. But since the manuscript of that work had been nearly 2 years finished, we had not been idle. The conclusion of myself and my brother was that when all was said and done, the truly novel element and the candidate for being the causal element in the situation at La Chirera was the mushroom. It was Storpharia cubensis which stood behind all of the effects that we had experienced, and as this realization grew, so did the understanding that if this was the case, then new expeditions into the unimaginable could be launched only if a supply of the mushrooms could be secured. Now it happened that on that second trip to La Chirera, the mushroom had been much less abundant than the first time, and this scarcity had impelled me to take a number of spore prints from the few specimens that we did run across. Those spore prints had been kept refrigerated over the years while my brother and I pursued academic careers and wrote our book. During those intervening years, we dabbled with the thought of cultivating Storpharia cubensis, but the only work on the subject was Wasson and M's work in French, and it seemed somehow a remote and technically difficult thing to attempt. In the spring of 1972, we had already isolated the mycelium of the mushroom and had it growing on agar in petri dishes, but it was not until the early spring of '75 that we encountered an article detailing a method for growing commercial mushrooms on rye in canning jars under very carefully controlled conditions. Perhaps this method would also work for Storpharia cubensis and get our stalled exploration of the invisible moving again. Working in close consultation with my brother in Colorado, we determined within a matter of weeks that the hardy Storpharia not only grew and fruited with the new method, but that it was less fragile and easier to grow than the agaricus species sold in grocery stores as food. The implications of all this were not lost upon us. From the spring of 1975 onward, I was not without a continual supply of Storpharia. Ev and I had parted earlier in the year. I was living alone and finishing up an academic career that had lasted far too long, what with 7 years of wandering around the world scheduled in. It was a time of loneliness, self-examination, and work pressure. Into that world came suddenly the perfected method for growing the same organism that had been the means to opening up the dimension of contact 4 years before. The very spores gathered at La Chirera were now furiously producing mushroom psilocybin in my home. During the spring, I experimented with low dosages several times. The sense of peace and lightness that I associated with the halcyon days at La Chirera was definitely there. So too was the sense of a teaching voice and a return to close consultation with a cosmic agency of complex intent. Throughout the spring and summer of that year, I took the mushroom at doses of 5 grams dried or 50 grams fresh as often as I felt was prudent, which worked out to about once every 2 weeks. Each of these experiences was a lesson, a chilling and exhilarating plunge into an ocean of noetic images. I discovered my own mind like a topological manifold lying before me, inviting me to rove and scan the reflective knot of past and future time that I am. Alien presences and translinguistic elves bent near to me in those trances. The mushroom stressed its age, its vast knowledge of the ebb and flow of historical forces in many civilizations with which it had been associated through the millennia. Images of the past and future abounded. Once I found myself on a hill with a crowd of people. The view looked out over a curved plain. It was the interior of a cylindrical space colony, miles in extent. Vast sweeps of windows alternated with farmlands and towns scattered along the floors of the valleys between each set of windows. I knew somehow that in the future I was seeing hundreds of millions of people lived in such cylindrical worlds. The teeming worlds that populate the galaxy in the minds of our science fiction writers had been recreated inside a sphere only 12 light hours in diameter and with the sun at its center. Within that sphere, thousands of independent societies pursued their destinies and their evolution. Thousands of independent cylinder worlds swarming around the infinite energy furnace of the sun. What a rich and endlessly creative force humanity had become in escaping the confines of the planet. Through the vast windows I could see more advanced machinery being made ready. A starship. It was the departure of an experimental starship. Copeland's fanfare for the common man was being played. Again I saw alternative futures where the knowledge of the mushroom was not fused with humanity's restless expansionism. I saw a planet covered with a society of slave worker machine symbiotes. I saw the life of North American society running through several hundred years of upheaval and political change, an image like a great animated war planning board. The dualism of fascism and democracy hung around America's neck like the albatross. Again and again, nightmare police-state fascism would sweep like a foul tide over the aspirations of the people, and again, the subtlety of the people would organize around the stupidity of the oppressor and rise in wild and bloody revolt to again secure the space of a few generations in which to inaugurate attempts at democratic social justice. The mushroom always returned to the theme that it was wiser in the ways of evolution and sympathetic, therefore, to a symbiotic union of the technical control of matter possessed by humanity and its own sense of the howness of things that had been developed over millions of years of conscious experience as an intelligent organism radiating through the galaxy. From its own point of view, it is an elder life form, and as such it offers its tempering experience to a vibrant but naive child race that stands for the first time on the brink of the stars. As our imagination has striven outward to attempt to encompass the possibility of the intelligent other somewhere in the starry galaxy, so the other, observing this, now reveals itself to be among us as an aspect of ourselves when in the psilocybin trance. In the phenomenon of Storphariad cubensis, we are confronted with an intelligent and seemingly alien life form, not as we commonly imagine it, but an intelligent alien life form nevertheless. It is only an anachronistic lack of modern self-reflection that would lead any thinker on the subject of extraterrestrial life to suppose that any intelligent alien would be even remotely like ourselves. Evolution is an unceasing river of forms and adaptive solutions to special conditions, culture even more so. It is far more likely that an alien intelligence would be barely cognizable to us as such, rather than that it should overwhelm us with such similarities as anthropoid form and an intimate knowledge of our gross industrial capacity. Star-traveling species would have a sophisticated knowledge of genetics and DNA function, and therefore would not necessarily bear the form which evolution on a native planet had given them. they might well look as they wished to look. In the late summer of 1975, Dennis and I decided that the world we were exploring required a wider audience so that some consensus concerning what was going on could be established. To that end, we wrote and published a guide on the method we had developed to cultivate the Stropharia. At the beginning of that little book, I introduced what we had personally learned about the world of the mushroom. The mushroom speaks, and our opinions rest upon what it tells eloquently of itself in the cool night of the mind. I am old, older than thought in your species, which is itself 50 times older than your history. Though I have been on earth for ages, I am from the stars. My home is no one planet, for many worlds scattered through the shining disk of the galaxy have conditions which allow my spores an opportunity for life. The mushroom which you see is the part of my body given to sex thrills and sunbathing. My true body is a fine network of fibers growing through the soil. These networks may cover acres and may have far more connections than the number in a human brain. My mycelial network is nearly immortal. Only the sudden toxification of a planet or the explosion of its parent star can wipe me out. By means impossible to explain because of certain misconceptions in your model of reality, all my mycelial networks in the galaxy are in hyperlight communication across space and time. The mycelial body is as fragile as a spider's web, but the collective hypermind and memory is a vast historical archive of the career of evolving intelligence on many worlds in our spiral star swarm. Space, you see, is a vast ocean to those hardy life forms that have the ability to reproduce from spores, for spores